All right. Hello, CIS C157 students. I wanted to record a quick video for your Week 10 programming assignment. So in this module, you're diving into strings and characters in Python, learning a little bit more advanced techniques for working with some of those data types. And to help you tackle your password strength analyzer assignment, I'm going to walk you through kind of a similar program, introducing a lot of the concepts that you'll need for your assignment. For this one, instead of analyzing a password, we're going to build a product serial code validator. So you can imagine that you're working for some kind of company that sells a product, and at some point, the company needs to verify a serial number when it's entered by a user to make sure that it meets specific formatting rules, that it doesn't change, and how you can suggest feedback to the user if they enter a serial code that maybe is missing some of the required characters or is in the wrong format. All right. So the first thing we'll do here, we'll start in Visual Studio Code. First, we're going to need to get some input from the user in the form of the serial code that the user might be entering here. So I'll start off by defining our variable serial code equals, and then we'll just use our input function. All right, after we get the serial code, we can just do a print statement to kind of separate the different sections of our program here. So just for formatting, so I'll do character encoding section first, which is one of the first requirements of the assignment. So now computers don't actually understand letters, they only understand numbers. And in Python, Python uses Unicode specifically, which is a character encoding, to map characters to integers. So what we're going to do first to demonstrate this is we're going to loop through just the first 5 characters of the serial code that's entered to see what they look like under the hood in Unicode. And to do that, we're going to use the slice operation on a list to grab those characters. And then we're going to use our ORD function to get the integer code point for the specific character that's entered by the user. So we're going to have to use a for loop to do this. So I'm going to start writing that out. So we'll do for character in serial code. And then we want to open up an index here, and we want to take the first 5 characters. So a shorthand for that in Python, if we want to start at the beginning of the list and go 5 characters deep, we can just open up our brackets and then do a colon and 5 here. And that will be a slice of the first 5 characters. And then of course, we'll put another colon at the end for the for syntax. And then what do we want to do here? Well, for each of these characters, we want to print, and we'll use an F string, the actual character, which will be the char variable that we labeled up here in our loop. And then we can do like an arrow and the code point associated with that. And this will be the ORD function where we pass in that same char variable. Okay, zoom out a little bit. So just like that. So what this will do again, we're going to loop through just the first 5 characters, and then we're going to print the actual character that the user input, and then we're going to convert it to its Unicode, or its code point, and we're going to print that with the ORD function here. All right. Next thing we want to do is kind of show how we can make this conversion both ways, right? So that this is a two-way operation. So after our for loop, let's pick one character here. I think in your assignment, it tells you to grab a specific one. I'll grab the third character here, and we'll convert it back using the char or the char function instead of the ORD function here. All right, so first we'll define the character we're talking about. So I'll make a variable called, how about picked code point? And that will equal, again, ORD, and then our serial code list at index 2. All right, so I'll pick the third one here. That'll be index 2. And then we just want to print with an F string again, kind of what we just did in reverse. So we'll do first the code point, and that will be our picked code point. And then same arrow syntax, and then the character. Now this time, instead of calling the ORD function, we're going to call the CHR function here. And that will convert from our code point back to a regular character. And so that'll be picked code point. Okay. So let's go ahead and run this, and we'll run it with a few examples here to show what gets printed out. So I'll bring the terminal up, and we will just run the code. And it's going to ask for a serial code. So let me just do A, B, C, D, E, F, G. We'll just start with that. All right, and then if we hit enter here, we see that it goes through the first 5 characters, so A through E, and it prints out the code point for each of those. And then we take specifically the third index, which is that capital C, and we can already see that the code point was 67, and this performs a conversion back for us. All right, let me run it again. I'm going to do some different characters here, something that you might see in an actual serial code. So I'll do like ABC-123-A359, something like that. And we'll hit enter there. Okay. So we'll go through this again. We have the code point numbers related to the characters. We'll see that they don't just have to be letters. They can be symbols as well. So we have the dash or the hyphen here, which maps to the code point 45. And then we have numbers, integers, right, which also map to different numbers here. Right, so that's an important thing to know for these code points is that the characters don't have to just be letters. They can in fact be special characters like the @ sign or the pound sign or a dash here. And also integers. Integers themselves are not code points. So if you take like an integer value 1 and you perform that OR function on it, it is going to transform that to another integer or another number. And then same thing, we are just converting back that third item there. Okay, so that should cover kind of the first part or the first requirement in your assignment that was asking you to perform those operations. Make sure you read the assignment instructions carefully, though, to make sure that you're kind of following along with those. This is the same concept, but a little bit different than what you're being asked to do there. All right, so let's move on to kind of the second part of the assignment, which are some string operations that we're asked to perform. So we're going to do some structural analysis using Python's built-in string operations. What we want to know is the length, if our string contains a specific character, and we want to isolate a specific part of the string as well. Okay, these are all requirements from your programming assignment. So first, how long is the string? In Python, there is an len or a len function that can tell us the length of a string. So we're going to use that one first. Let me print another header here so that we can just separate kind of and organize our program. We'll do a string operations header. And then we want to print the code, the serial code length. So we'll do print. I'll use an F string. We'll do serial code length, colon, and then we want to pass in the variable len, and then just our entire serial code string, which is a reminder, that's the user input we get at the very beginning. And this will just return an integer number, which is the length of that serial code. The next thing we want to do is we want to check for specific characters in the serial code to make sure it matches our format. So in the example, the second example I gave, there was a hyphen. We had some letters and then a hyphen and some numbers. So why don't we check for that hyphen character to kind of validate that our serial code at least contains that one required character. In Python, we can do this using the in keyword, which checks whether or not a character is in a given string or not. So I'll do another print statement here, and we'll say contains, and then in single quotes, a hyphen. And then I'm going to open up a variable expression in an F string, and I'm specifically going to say is the hyphen character in serial code. Now this will return a Boolean value, so true or false. So what we're saying here is contains hyphen colon, and then if it does, this will return true if a hyphen is in serial code. If not, if the hyphen is not in serial code or it can't find one, it will return false. Okay, And then the last thing that we were asked to do, or you're asked to do in your assignment, is to look at a few characters around the middle of the string to pull those out and take a look at those characters. And in order to do that, we're going to need to calculate what the middle of the string is first to get an index to index into, and then we can look at a grouping of those middle characters. So the first thing I'll do for that is I will declare a variable called mid, and I'll set that equal to the length of the serial code, and then I'm going to use integer division to divide by 2. And this will give us approximately the middle of the string, right? If it's an even number, it'll give us the middle kind of rounded up. If it's an odd number, it will give us the middle index of the string. And then once we have that, let's say that we want to print, for example, like the middle 3 characters. We can do an F string and we can say middle 3 characters. And then we will do our serial code, and then we're going to index, and then we're going to do a range here. So we have the midpoint. So why don't we start our range with mid minus 1? And then we'll do a colon, and that'll go all the way up to mid plus 1. Okay? So this range that we're specifying here contains mid minus 1, which is 1 to the left of our middle number, and then our mid plus 1. So we can try to run this and see what it looks like now that we've performed these different operations. And I'll use that same kind of input that I used before. So ABC 1, 2, 3. ABC 1, 2, 3. What did I write? 359. Okay, so the first part we already went over. So let's see here. Serial code length equals 12. Well, let's count it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That looks correct. Contains a hyphen. We got true because we do have 2 hyphens in there. And then middle 3 characters, 23. So I was off here. I'm glad we caught this. This index here is not including the end element. So we're going to have to actually do mid plus 2 here to include that. And so that was an error on my part. But this is a good example of why we want to kind of run our code as we're writing it and check the output so that we can catch any errors or bugs like this when our code is fresh in our mind, when we've just written it. Okay, so we can either do mid minus 1 to mid plus 2 or like mid minus 2 to mid plus 1. That's really up to you. We're essentially just grabbing a grouping, though, of 3 of the characters around the middle. So we'll try to run it again. 3. And then we get 1, 2, 3 here, which looks like it matches to what we kind of said was the middle of the string. Okay, and that's because I did mid minus 2. Just to demonstrate, if I change this to mid minus 1 and mid plus 2, we should get the 2, 3, and the hyphen, right? So let's run it again and just verify that our code is behaving the way we expect it to. There we go. And so now the middle 3 are the 2, the 3, and the hyphen. So this middle 3 here. Okay? Important thing to take away, though, from this one is how to find the midpoint of a string. And so this is one way to do it, by just using integer division by 2 on the length. And then we can use our string slicing, the same thing we used in the beginning, using that mid variable to grab a grouping of characters around the middle. And slicing, we'll talk about string slicing really quickly. Slicing itself is just this bracket notation where we have bracket and then we have an integer value to the left, a colon, and an integer value to the right, with a start and stop essentially. So to keep this separate from the exact slice, we want to do our assignment first. And so we can use this on a throwaway string, for example. Just to demonstrate how this works again, if we do the string A, B, C, D, E, F, G, we can go right after that and we can do 2 colon 5 as the slice. And if we run this now, just do that for the beginning, we can see that it prints out CDE. So this is another way that we can use our string slicing notation in line with a string. Right, so you can see here, I just declared a string within a print statement, and right afterwards, I just did the string slicing, and it does not print the whole string. It performs this slicing operation in line. Okay, so it's another technique that you can use to do string slicing if you pass in the whole string there. All right, for your own code, you'd want to combine these two ideas. So you want to use mid to anchor the slice and then pick a few characters around it. The endpoints are up to you. So I said near the middle. And so like I said, you can do string mid -2, mid +2, mid +1, as long as you're grabbing a grouping around the middle and demonstrating that you're able to find the middle of a string. All right. And the last thing we're going to go over in this section here is like for security, we might want to mask this code in our logs so that we don't have a record of it printed if our program is saving its output. And in order to mask the string here, we can use kind of a Python shorthand syntax here. So we'll do masked code equals, and then we're going to do the asterisk character, and we're going to multiply that by, again, the length of our serial code. And then we can just print with an F string our masked value as the masked code. Okay, now important here, I'm not overwriting serial code with this masked value. I'm defining a new variable because we don't want to lose the serial code. But again, if you didn't want the actual serial code printed out to the logs or on a terminal for security reasons, this might make more sense with like a password or something. You could use this type of masking so that you still have access to the variable in the program, but you are outputting essentially just the length of it masked. So we'll do the same ABC, 1, 2, 3. And then you can see it'll just print out the masked values at the bottom there that are the same length, right? So this should be 12 characters long. Okay. So that finishes it up for kind of all the things that you're asked to do in general for the string method part of the assignment. The next part of your assignment asks you to implement some Boolean string methods. So for the core logic, we want to ask ourselves, or you want to ask yourself for your assignment, what are the requirements for a strong password that you're analyzing? For this example, I need to ask myself, what is a valid serial code and what criteria does it need to meet? So for a serial code, I probably want to have a minimum length, whether it contains uppercase, lowercase, digits, or symbols. And we can track all of these different values with Boolean flags. And then, for example, we can start with the length check. That can be a single expression, and the rest we'll need to check within a loop. So let's set up our flags first so we can kind of show what this looks like. I'm going to do another section of the program, and we'll call this validation checks. Okay. All right, so let's do this. Let's define some flags here. And flags are just Boolean variables, true, false variables. And we'll start by setting all of them to false first. And then as we go through and perform our checks, if they pass our checks, we will change the value of these variables to true, but we'll default to false first. So I can say is long enough, right, is one variable, and we'll set that to false. And remember to capitalize in Python. So has upper, we can set that to false. Has lower, has digit. And then how about has symbol? All right, so these will probably be the ones you'll want to use for your password here. Okay, and so now that we have all of these different flags here, we want to basically go through each character in the password or in the serial code in this example and perform these different checks on them, right? So the first check is long enough. We don't need to use a loop for that. So what we can do is we can actually do that in line. There's two ways to do that. We could do an if statement to start. So we can say if the len of serial code is greater than or equal to, our value, which we can probably define that here too. So min length equals, let's say it's 8. So if the length of the serial code is greater than or equal to 8, then we can change the value of is long enough to true. Just like that. Okay. Another way that we can do this, and it's a little bit more Pythonic, is we can actually do it all in line. Either way works. And so just choose whichever one makes more sense to you. But I'm going to go back to this is long enough variable. And instead of setting it equal to false, I'm going to set it equal to the len of the serial code greater than or equal to min length. All in line here. And this is doing the same thing. So this is asking, is the length of the serial code greater than or equal to 8? If it is, this will return true, and is long enough will be true. If it's not, is long enough will be false, because this expression will evaluate to false. Okay, so we can do it all in line there. And then the rest of these are going to require a loop now, where we loop through every individual character and we check for all of these different flags or fields here. So for example, we could say for car in serial code, and then we'll do a series of if and elif statements. So if the character, and if we want to check uppercase, our strings have these different methods on them, right? So we can use our dot notation, and your textbook talks about all of the ones you're asked to do here. To check if a character is upper or lowercase, there is an is upper method, just like that. And you can see that it returns a Boolean value. True if the character is uppercase, false if it's not. So if the character is upper, then we'll just say has upper equals true. Okay, and then we could do like elif car dot is lower, and then we can say has lower equals true, and then elif, right? And we just keep doing this. And so I'm actually going to stop here because the format is exactly the same. For each one of these flags, you want to do an if-elif branch here, and you want to find the string method that checks for that value. And so there will be a string method for all of these, right? So I showed you the upper and lower. You can go back to your textbook or Google or consult AI for what the dot notation is on a character to check whether or not it is a digit, and then to check whether or not it is a symbol. So essentially not a digit and not a regular letter. Okay, and you would just go through and set it to true like that. And then at the very end, you would essentially print the results. So as an example here, I am going to just do these two, and then let's do some print to show. So let's do a print statement, and we'll say length greater than equal to 8. And then we'll just print the variable is long enough. And then we'll do two more. Let's print the has upper and has lower. So we'll do has uppercase. And then we'll do lowercase. So we'll print has lowercase. Okay, and just print those values like that. And so let's go ahead and run this now, and we'll do a couple different inputs to make sure that our checks are actually working here. So we'll run it. Okay, so first I'm just going to do ABC-123-ABC again. So all uppercase, no lowercase in here. And then we have our length, which is greater than or equal to 8, just looking at this one. So we'll scroll down to the bottom. So let's look at the validation checks here at the bottom of my screen. So is the length greater than or equal to 8? True. Does it have an uppercase? True. Have lowercase? False, right? And that is correct based on the input that I gave it. Let's try some other inputs. It's always a good idea to test the different branches of your code. So I'm going to type in just ABC dash lowercase a. So this one should return true for both the uppercase and the lowercase, but it should not pass the length check. And indeed, we get a false for the length check, and we get true for the other two checks. All right, and then we'll just do one more with all lowercase. Okay, and that one wasn't 8 characters, so we get a false for the length, we get a false for has upper, and a true for has lowercase. So we kind of checked all the different branches here to make sure that our validation logic is working the way that we think it should be working. Okay, and then again, you'll want to implement some of the other ones yourself, but they'll be in the same format. So you'll want to look for the dot syntax and then some function, some method that exists on characters that'll allow you to perform that check. All right, in the final section of your assignment here, this is the one asking for rating and feedback of the password. So we go through and we kind of categorize whether or not, the password or the serial code in this example has all these different properties or these different types of characters in it. But then we need to rate the password or rate the serial code, kind of assign a score, and then even make recommendations to the user for how they could improve their password in your example. So what I'll do for this one here is what we want to do is one way I recommend you do this is you can turn these ratings into a single score. So let me show you like this. These are the 5 things that we're checking in this program. So we're checking the length, uppercase, lowercase, digit, and symbol. All of these are Boolean values. We have 5 of them. So it's important here to remember in Python that these Boolean values are actually integers under the hood. So true has an integer value, false has an integer value as well. And we can use that to sum up kind of the total results of these at the end in order to give a score for our password or for the specific serial code that we're using here. So let's do this to show how that would work. Do a new section again, and I'll call this one final rating. All right, so as an example, we can just say score equals, and you can track this in your loop too, but for right now, I'll just say score equals all of the variables added together. So is long enough plus has digit plus has symbol plus has lower plus has upper. Okay, so I'm just literally adding together all of the variables, the flags that we were tracking here. And that's going to be our score. And then I can just print the score to show you how this one works here. So let's run it again. And so let's see what happens if I just enter a code of A, B, C. Let me run this again so it shows up correctly. Okay, enter code. So I'm just going to do ABC all lowercase. So based on the checks that we're doing here, the digit and symbols is going to be false because we're not checking for those. Has lower will be true. Has upper will be false. And this one is not long enough. So it should return 1 for our score. And we see 1 down there. Let me make my print statement a little bit better. So it's just clear what we're doing there. Okay. Let's try one that passes all 3 that we're checking so we get a result of 3. So I'll do my A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, A, B, C, D, E. A, B, C, D, E. Lowercase at the end there. So this one should return 3, right? Because it is long enough, so we get a true, which equates to 1. It has uppercase and it has lowercase. So that's 3 out of the 5 flags that'll be true. And reminder, the other 2 are false by default because we're not checking for them in this program. Because I want you all to implement that logic yourselves. And so we get a score of 3 right here. So that's one way that you can calculate the rating for your password strength meter. For example, there is just by adding up those Boolean flags that you're checking. Once we get the score, then we can kind of print different output for the user here. So for example, we can say if the score is greater than or equal to 3, we can, or let's do 4. We can say that the rating equals valid, elif, or we can do else. So if it's basically 3 or less, then the rating equals invalid, just like that. And then we can do another print statement for the user. So we can say, let's do rating. Your serial code scored and then score. Do something like that, and we can get rid of this print here. Okay, so if we run this again, ours is always going to be invalid because the most we can get is 3, but we'll just show this again, A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, A, B, C, D. All right, so it says invalid, your serial code scored 3, right? Which is correct. That's the correct logic we wanted. To show what the other one looks like, just to test it here, I'm going to just change this has symbol to true. Run the same thing again. ABC, 1, 2, 3. All right, valid. Your serial code scored 4, right? So our logic is working right there, and we're able to print that for the user. And then we want to make a suggestion to the user based on the score that they're getting. And your assignment has specific suggestions or things to check for in order to make improvement suggestions for a user. Um, Basically, the method that you want to use in order to perform that suggestion and print that out for the user, you want to use the replace method that your textbook talks about and that your assignment is going to require here. So an example of that could be, let's see here, could be this. So you could say, let's just do an example of this on its own. So cleaned equals, I'm going to show an example of replacing an underscore with a hyphen in here. So let's say we have a serial code of ABC 1, 2, 3, just like that, 1, 2, 3 AB. And then in order to kind of clean this string, if we want to replace this underscore right here with a hyphen, we would have the string, and then we could do a dot replace, and then replace takes two arguments. It takes the old or the specific character that we're trying to replace, so it's an underscore, and then it takes a new, which is what we want to replace it with, which is a hyphen. Okay, and then if we print just an F string, maybe like cleaned serial code, clean there. Okay, we can see that the serial code gets replaced with this hyphen at the end here. All right, so you'll just want to make sure that you're using kind of this replace syntax in order to make that substitution when you're recommending changes to a user for them to improve their password. Now, for yours, you'll have to implement some more logic or checks, but just remember, all of that logic can be implemented with if, elif statements, right? Essentially, all of it, you can just check for the different Boolean flags, check, you know, whether or not your password, for example, is missing any of these fields. And if it is, you can make a different suggestion to a user, right? So you could like replace, for example, if it was all lowercase, you could replace the first character of the string of the password passed in with an uppercase character, right? Um, yeah, and I think that covers it. Let me look through my notes here just to make sure I'm not missing anything else. Yeah, I think that that covers all of the different kind of pieces that you'll need to piece together your assignment. Again, your assignment is going to be more involved in this one. I do recommend that you use kind of functions that you've learned previously to separate all this logic as well. I just wanted to show you the individual pieces that you would need to make sense of the assignment. But that's pretty much it for this toolkit. So we walk through character encoding, right? That's the first thing that we did. So we used this ORD function as well as the CHR function to reverse that process there. We did some string operations. So you learned how to check the length of the string with the len function. You learned the in syntax to check if a character is in a string. We learned the slicing syntax, which again is this bracket syntax with an integer separated by colons to define a range on a string. And we also learned some string methods like is upper, is lower. Another one would be like is digit, give that hint away, and then you'll have to find the one for what would be appropriate to find if it's a symbol or not. And then we basically went over the if-else block that we would need to check each character in your password or in the serial code in this example to see if it passes the checks for these Boolean flags that we set. So again, what I didn't do was fill out the full character check loop. I didn't show you how to turn your Booleans into a score necessarily. I didn't use the assignments kind of three-tier rating system. So we just did kind of an if and then else statement. So you'll want to modify that. And I didn't show you the specific suggestion patterns the assignment is asking for when recommending improvements. So those pieces are for you to research. But again, you have all the tools that you need here, and you just need to assemble them now into your full password strength analyzer assignment. Again, key takeaway here, make sure to test your code frequently, just like I was doing. I recommend just writing one piece of logic or one section at a time, putting some print statements afterwards, and then kind of being aware of what results you think you're looking for, and then run your program and run it frequently. That way you can catch bugs and errors early, and you won't have to kind of retrace your steps if something isn't working at the end. You'll pick it up very, very quickly. As always, make sure that you paste in your full source code as a portion of your assignment, and then just take a screenshot of your analyzer running at the end here, kind of showing all of this output. And use the starter code or the kind of demo output that I put in your assignment as well to give you a head start with this. So good luck, everyone. Happy coding, and I will talk with you all soon.